Wukusu, peace, black power, and welcome to Harlem Liberation School's YouTube channel. Harlem Liberation School is a black nationalist, pan-African community organization based in Harlem. We provide relevant and credible political education to help black people wake up, clean up, and stand up, in the words of Brother Malcolm X. To do this, we provide panel discussions, political commentary, mini documentaries, leadership tips, classes, and interviews with some of our most dedicated and effective leaders, activists, and intellectuals around the world. Peace and Black Power families, Brother Agyei Tyehimba from Harlem Liberation School, where we teach black people to wake up, clean up, and stand up. I hope everybody is at peace, yet preparing to respond to the war being waged against black people, indigenous people, and people of color in these United States and indeed around the world. I don't have to tell you about how fascist leaning this country has become. It's never been particularly loving to black folk, but I don't, in my recent memory, I don't remember it ever being moving in a directly fascist sort of position. And I hope that we will all be vigilant, make sure we don't become demoralized, and come up with ways to fight back, right? And to answer what is clearly a regime that's moving in a fascist direction. That said, I want to thank you all of you who came out to hear our first broadcast dealing with political prisoners, the political prisoner report, myself, and really Brother Bomani Uhuru Jahar Shakur leading the way. He's really the host of that particular monthly broadcast, second Wednesday of every month at 6:30 p.m. I'm more of the general host, but he's really the driving force of that. We also have today our first episode, conquering racial trauma, where we also have another very brilliant and important and talented brother in our community, Dr. Dennis Ausar Winkler, who is going to be in a similar fashion. I'll be hosting, but he's really going to be the driving force as a person who is educated specifically in counseling and therapy and helping us understand, diagnose, and treat trauma. He's going to be kind of leading that discussion. Really happy to have him. Before we begin, I think I saw him trying to get in the studio. I think he got kicked off. But before we begin, I wanted to say, as the Queen says here, she says, Wukusu to the family, Wukusu being the acronym. And the greeting that Harlem Liberation School uses, Wukusu acronym, meaning wake up, clean up, and stand up. We think it is one of the most fitting greetings because it's a call to the action. It tells us in our greeting exactly what we're all supposed to be doing. And there's obviously different ways to do that, but wake up, get your consciousness right, know what's going on, who you are, and whose you are as Africans, new Africans in this country and in this world. Clean up, be self-corrective, always seeking to identify the things about ourselves, our actions and behavior that are self-defeating, that get in the way of us being vigilant people, self-determined people, empowered people. And finally, last but not least, stand up, finding out who you are, getting conscious, correcting yourself, getting rid of your self-defeating behavior, and now exerting leadership in your families, in your communities, in the organizations, right? That's what we're here to do. Family, I want to also have the Queen has another comment, and you know I'm in support. She says, welcome to this episode of Harlem Liberation School, featuring our brother, Dr. Dennis Ausar Winkler, and please give him a warm welcome. I want to say, before we get started and bring our brother on, I want to remind people that I'm doing monthly workshops. I've committed to this every month of this year, 2026. I'm doing a grassroots leadership workshop. Now, we already did one dealing with how to generate, to solicit, and to generate relevant community input, how to know what our community thinks, what they want, what their challenges are, right? And their impression of the work we do. and how to do that. And we also dealt with how to prioritize tasks in our organizations so that we are allocating the right amount of money and the right amount of time to the things that are most important in our organizations. That's very important. It's hardcore community organizing stuff here. It's not sexy and glamorous, but trust and know it. When we get those things right, it creates a strong foundation for us to do that community organizing work. Now, having said that, family, you see, make sure I got it's a sister, I think that sister, Abner Africa is saying hello there, if I'm correct. Who's also, we've had on the broadcast, she's also a licensed therapist. She's a social worker. She has a book out, Malcolm's Mandate. She talks about racial trauma as well. I want to welcome her to the broadcast, and certainly we ask you to go out and get her book, Malcolm's Mandate, in which she gives a sort of a 12-point um, program for recovery. You know how you have Alcoholics Anonymous, things of that nature, where she's come up with her own recovery program for people who are victims of racialized trauma. Check out her book and support our sister, and look on the channel here and see our broadcast that we had with our sister as well. She's referred to as the traumatized traumatologist. Thank you for coming through, my sister. Now let us bring our brothers on. I want to say good afternoon and welcome to Conquering Racial Trauma here at Harlem Liberation School. This monthly broadcast features Dr. Dennis Ausar Winkler, who's an educator, counselor, and founder of the Temple of New African Thought Holistic Wellness Center in Baltimore. You know, family, I've never been there. I've never been to his center. But I tell you, I checked out a few interviews he did there, and man, it's very impressive. Very, very impressive. It's a space. They got food. They have a piece where there's a restaurant. I believe he and his wife may operate principally. They have a spot that's where they have their meetings, where they can set up chairs and PA system. They got some books. They have some herbal products going on. It's really impressive. Very, very impressive. Together in this broadcast, we're going to be exploring how historical and lived trauma influences the ways we think, form our relationships, parent our children, organize our communities, right? And engage in liberation work. And in this particular episode, our purpose is really not to blame or shame the brothers and sisters in the community. We all been bitten by the same white supremacist dog, as Brother Malcolm would say, but it's to gain deeper clarity about the wounds that we carry and how those wounds or trauma shape our understanding of the world, right? Ultimately, conquering racial trauma is about returning to alignment in our relationships, our families, and our collective work for liberation. This is going to be the second Saturday of every month at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So without further delay, I want to bring our brother on, our brother, Dr. Dennis Ausar. I generally refer to him as Dr. Ausar. I hope he doesn't mind. We'll find out in a minute. Hold on, family. Oh.
Blessings, Baba Tyehimba.
Peace, my brother. For some reason, let's try this. Hey, there's my brother. How you doing, man?
He is here.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
And likewise.
First, I want to thank you. I want to thank our brother. May I call you Dr. Ausar, Brother Ausar? Is that all right, good brother?
That is fine.
All right. We want to thank Dr. Ausar for, first of all, making time to be here, family. People who's revolutionaries and educators are doing this work. We're busy. We got a lot of projects. So anytime somebody says I could do it, I understand that they are sacrificing something else because we all have a lot on our plate. So I want to thank him for that. I don't take his time for granted. And I want to thank him for his persistence, because I said, brother, maybe we could do something. And that brother got in touch with me, said, brother, you playing or what? What we doing? When we doing it? I respect that. Yeah, initiative. Brother, glad to have you here. For those who don't know you and are not familiar with you, could you help them understand your background, specifically as relates to what we're going to be talking talking about, so they understand that you come in here, you're not a featherweight or a bantamweight. You are in fact a heavyweight when it comes to what we're talking about.
I appreciate that. I'm not, this is probably the most difficult aspect of any interview I do is speak to that. I'm working past it though, as my dear Baba Imhotep Fatul says. He says that we ain't got no time to be modest, right? so 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 sometimes in the past has been my struggle. But nonetheless, I'll say just quickly, I was brought up, um, first and foremost in Baltimore City, Baltimore, Maryland, via two wonderful parents, my mama Angie and my baba Ausar. So they have to be a part of the narrative and the story and the reason why I come before you, and what adds some level of I guess how they say it, some credentials, because I think it starts with my parents, right? The work they've done in the community and inside of the family, and also being brought up inside of an African Senate household, from an African Senate framework and communal Senate and community Senate framework and familial and family Senate framework. I think that part of the African Senate upbringing has aided me in navigating, I'm going to call, the streets of Baltimore City. I didn't grow up in a light neighborhood, but I do feel like a lotus flower and ancient Kemet riding through the murky waters unscathed. And actually, I'll say that, because there's a lot of things as pertains to what people call trauma, and what is traumatic for one is not traumatic for others. So I think it's essential that we do also highlight that and flesh that out, that just because something has been traumatic for one person doesn't mean it's traumatic for another person. And I think that's essential, and connected it back to what I'm calling now African Senate upbringing, African Senate frameworks, African Senate lifestyles. Because lots of times people ask the question, what does African Senate do? So I would argue that by far, I haven't seen anything close to it. They say, what does that culture stuff do? I haven't seen anything close to it. And I'm not saying this from a religious standpoint. I'm saying this from a cultural standpoint. And I'm saying that no matter what your religious or your spiritual background is, some may argue and debate. I'm just saying, I think the closer you get centered to Africa and an African way of being, I think it sets us up for to be resourceful, resilient, balanced, and all those type of things. But nonetheless, going forward, skipping over a lot of years, did a lot of community work, started a lot of businesses. I noticed that the work in the community required more than the skills that I had at that moment. So I decided to go back to school as a minister of what they call the African Village and Culture Center, under the leadership of Dr. Ray Hagans at that point in time, which I became the national director of operations before I've evolved into TNAT Holistic Wellness Center. That's my family over there. Even up there, where you in Harlem? Well, they got a Brooklyn chapter. Say it again.
I said, yes, sir, Harlem.
Okay, yeah. Well, we had one brother named Sean that was I think he's in Germany somewhere like that right now. But there was a part of African Village and Cultural Center who used to commute from Harlem to Brooklyn, the Brooklyn African Village and Cultural Center up there. So I got some family up in NY as well. What I mean is my African Village family. But with that, I went through that rite of passage, I would say. I became a minister. Of course, I studied I was brought up on people like Dr. Let's say Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and all the greats, right? So my father made sure I listened to Lester Middleton and all the different lectures and just all the people, right? And from there, I saw the power in that, and I continued that path. I actually took that path on myself. Again, as I said, got consecrated as a minister in the African Village and Culture Center. From there, again, I struggled with some skills, I thought, because people will come in with addictions, people will come in with grief. I was like, what do I do with all of that? So I went back to school, went to I'm going to say a really good school, which I think that was African Senate, the most African Senate I could have seen in a white institution, but nonetheless was Loyola University here in Baltimore. But I did graduate from a real African Senate university before that. But my whole reason from graduating from the African Senate University called Sojourner Douglas College, rest in peace, Dr. Charles Simmons, who recently transitioned, and Dr. Marion Statton, the founders of that great institution, powerful institution, grassroots, revolutionary, African Senate, Black Power, civil rights. I'm saying it was birthed out of all these things. In those classes, and I'm going back there because I think it's essential to speak to my story. I went to that school purposely because I said if I'm Black and I'm talking about this Black stuff, I need to go to the Black school. So I went to Sojourner Douglas College, which was all those things. And we used textbooks like in the classroom. Just imagine the textbooks in the class was like Francis Quelsen's, Dr. Welson's ISIS papers, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Press, so many other Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro, same class. So we really, from that bachelor's level, we're taught to have a critical analysis, critical consciousness, and we were taught to be servants for our community. Of course, I went there with a state of consciousness, if we can call that, already. So it was right down my alley. So powerful institution. If people say, what has Pan-Africanism ever brought to us? What has African centeredness ever brought to us? Look up Sojourner Douglas College in that history. Sadly, after some years of the struggling with the system, I think after 40, 50 years, they're no longer operating at this moment. But from there, I went to Loyola University, and is the reason why I returned to school in the first place. And I got a degree in clinical mental health counseling, which also, that program, why I say it was African Senate, because it was maybe the most respected program, probably internationally, I would argue, as it pertains to spiritually integrated psychotherapy. So, and this happened in their pastoral counseling program. And I earned a degree in clinical mental health counseling, of course, with an emphasis in spirituality.
Yes,
From
sir.
there, I went on to earn my, I had a long story, but I'll just make it short. My PhD in counselor education and supervision, which at Waynesburg University, a school in Southeast Pennsylvania, which was a blessing, to be honest with you, because the story is long, but I won't give you the story. But I'll just step to my dissertation. And my dissertation at this particular university was measuring the relationship of race-based trauma, Black identity, and spirituality. So I say that it's been a journey, and a journey I've been on since I was young. And this journey has always felt as if the ancestors, if some may call them, the creator, some may call them, the universe, some may call them, whatever it is. I don't get into many debates and fights about that, but I can say I've always felt that the road was paved, and whatever I wanted to accomplish, it wasn't far out of sight.
That's what's up. And basically, for those of you who are watching at Harlem Liberation School, this is our first monthly broadcast with Dr. Dennis Ausar Winkler, Conquering Racial Trauma. And if you were able to listen to brother breaking down some of his background and his journey, then the long story short is we got the right man for the job, right? When we talk about trauma and all this stuff, this is not something you just jump in on, even if you're traumatized, right? Even if you're a victim of trauma. Sometimes we know what we've gone through, we know how we feel, but we not understand some of the frameworks to help put things in perspective, or how do we heal, which is why people go to therapists, right? People recognize I may have gone through it,
Mhm.
but I still need to deal with somebody who can help me process it and make sense of it, and maybe I don't know if you ever completely heal, but at least make sense of it and be able to move forward, right?
Mm.
I want to start with this question, Brother
Okay.
Ausar. Can you give a no? Let me start with a primary question. When we talk about conceptual lenses
Mhm.
or frameworks, what do we mean exactly by that? And how does trauma, whether it's personal or collective trauma, how does it shape the way many people in our community interpret the world, understand relationships and some of our social realities? Because a lot of people may not see that connection. You know, could you help us understand that?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that question. I think is one that yeah, it's we can go in a multiplicity of directions. Um, but on a, I mean, on a, I'll start with the clinical first and foremost, and then I'll go to the community. Yeah. So as clinicians, we are trained, especially those in counseling fields, they're trained with in a multiplicity of psychological and counseling theories. And what those conceptual frameworks help us do is to make sense out of the world. But not only sense out of the world for our own selves, but sense out of the world on how we conceptualize our clients. And in fact, in the counseling field, which I think is one of the most conceptually strong fields, we are taught and also train others to look at things with a variety of frameworks. So you use, of course, you use your social level models, you use your familial models, you use your developmental models, you use your psychological models, you might use personality. So you might use trauma based models. You'll use what they call attachment theory, which I think is you might use a variety of frameworks. But these frameworks give us an idea of what perhaps could be going on with this person. It helps us create a hypothesis about what has led to what, and hence how we understand this person that's showing up before us. So again, as Njia, which is my framework, Njia says, how do you understand this client? How do you not even client? How do you understand I'm going to integrate them now. How do you understand our community? Because you don't understand the client if you don't understand the community that they're in and the community they come from. So how do I understand their experiences? Again, this is understanding. How do you understand how the society has impacted the way they see, feel, experience, and behave in the world? So how do you understand these things? What is the historical reality? What happened to their forefathers and foremothers? Good, bad, ugly? What, the whole picture. What strengths does this person have as a result of the things that he or she or in between has experienced? So that's the way of understanding the world. So, but also we have to understand what political systems, and from in Gia's standpoint, everything is political. Now, this is my particular framework that I've developed, but I call this a collective model because I'm not the one. I didn't come up with all this information. I studied our scholars. I've listened to you, Baba Tyehimba. I've listened to many people, and I pull from that, I extract from that, and include that in the work that I do, in the way that I see our reality.
I
So
shaded
some,
that. Yeah.
pardon.
I shaded that. Yeah, the collective.
Yeah, so I call it the collective therapeutic model. Although I'm the one who's organizing and I have that skill set to do those type of things, because I'm a very conceptual person. So I really appreciate this starting question. I can't remember what the title was that we discussed, but I really appreciate that question. Maybe it's something to do with the title of today or whatever. But that conceptualization of how you understand, to me, if you don't understand what has happened and what's going on, what is plausible, and understand the reality, the history, the culture, the social, political struggle, the victories, all the things. If you don't understand that, then you really truly can't understand the individual or the community. In fact, you can't understand yourself. So that is the to me the primary aspect of the model called Njia, and all models by that is how did this model teach you? How does this framework? How does this world view? If we have to go to what our dear mamas like Marimba Ani, and even I just did a video the other day breaking down, allowing Dr. Amos Wilson to speak to how we understand this idea of identity, because people who don't understand identity or identities as being social political constructs are often confused. So it is very essential that we have something in some things, some frameworks, and this is what Njia allows. It allows a plural or a multiplicity of frameworks. It allows you to look at the world from various angles. It allows this is a both and perspective. This is Njia. This is my framework. So, but it's a collective African-centered framework. And when I say African-centered, I am not stopping in Africa. I'm saying wherever the African goes, he, she, and I want to say in between, takes what they have with them.
Now let me ask you this, Dr. Ausar. First of all, thank you for that thorough answer. I always like to start.
I'm not done yet, but
foundation.
Hey,
brother, we got another 40 minutes. We're going to rock and roll on them, no doubt about it. Okay. Remember, family, if you love this, which you will, tune in every second Saturday at 4 p.m. This ain't the last episode of this, family, all right? All right. So, can you help us conceptualize how, let's say, 3 different people, siblings, let's say, are in the same household. They all have experienced severe food deprivation, severe parental neglect. They're adultified. They're like 8, 9 years old, but because the parents are absent or not there, whatever, they're doing all this cooking and they're running the house almost. All these types of things we might say they witness violence in the neighborhood, all type these are young girls, these older men are trying to come on to them, all types of craziness. How might, first of all, we should not assume all 3 of them are traumatized at all or in the same way. Is that a yes or no to that first question?
100%.
Now, secondly, thank you. Now, secondly, is it also true that they may all be traumatized, but in different ways? Is that true?
I think that both are possible, and it also is possible that none of them are. So I think that any and all of the being traumatized or not being traumatized is possible. Yeah, that's answering that question. I think you had another part though.
Okay, that's now. How early in life? These are kind of little follow-up questions. Dr. Sarsa, bear with me, brother. This is not my forte. I'm leaning on you, good brother. But how early in life?
Answer that question. I feel like you asked me another aspect of that question. I wanted to make sure I did cover it.
Well, yeah, I guess it's is it possible that they will interpret their situation differently because they may have slightly differing trauma histories, although they're in the same household, the same neighborhood?
Oh yeah. So yeah. So the way I've heard it initially is that they can be traumatized differently. And then this time you actually ask the question in a different way, which is also, I think, essential, is that can they interpret it differently? And I think in your second way of asking that question is the answer. In fact, the interpretation, it what determines whether or not one is traumatized or not.
Please explain that.
It is the meaning. One of the reasons why Black people, African people are resilient is that we have the ability to make meaning out of some of the most catastrophic circumstances. And to be 100% accurate and honest here, when we study Black African people, when I mean Black African Americans even, right? I'm including this all together. Let's get an example of like Hurricane Katrina. One of the things you notice is that Black people, many times due to their spiritual resources and interpretation or conceptualization of the world, they make meaning out of some of the most catastrophic circumstances, which serves as a protective barrier against what we will call trauma. See, trauma or traumatization typically is a place of being stuck because you felt overwhelmed, you felt unsafe, you felt that you couldn't protect yourself. So your body and your nervous system didn't feel like it could defend itself. So what happens is the nervous system typically goes into a hyperaroused state. You either, as people say, you run. If you can't run, you fight. You can't fight. You fight. You flee. If you can't flee, you freeze. If you can't freeze, if after freezing, if you can't help yourself, you faint. There's a variety of ways of looking at that. But nonetheless, if you felt like you were a victim, if you felt powerless, if you felt hopeless, then it's more likely that you will become traumatized. But your interpretation of that could be very different. You could say, well, you know what? God doesn't give you anything greater than what you can handle. Now, sometimes that's spiritual bypassing, but other times that is actually how people see the world. So, see, a trauma, if we look at it on a physical sense, we have to look at it like this. So a person who, like I say, you can jump out this window. I'm on the second floor in a row house right here in this building I'm in right now, the wellness center. So you can jump out of this window and hurt yourself. One person. Another person can jump out and not experience any type of trauma. So what happens to one person doesn't happen to the other person. But in a psychological sense, it's more about, instead of that person who jumped out and didn't get hurt, maybe there's some level of agility there. There's some psychosocial spiritual agility that one may have who are not so susceptible to trauma. Another thing to realize is that people, as we age, are more susceptible to trauma depending on their rearing. And that is why I'm saying I feel like I rose through the murky waters like a lotus. But when you feel that way, when you protect it, when you feel protected, when you feel safe, it is less likely that life's events will traumatize you as well. So that's why our development is very essential. Our childhood development is very essential. If you feel cared for, if you feel safe, if you feel like somebody got your back, if you feel like you got people who will protect you, then you're less likely to be traumatized. You're less likely to go into relationships with fear. See, to me, in essence, I like to explain things very basically. To me, trauma in a psychosocial spiritual sense is it impacts one's ability to trust him or herself and other people. It impacts people's ability to be in relationship with one another. Because when you struggle to trust yourself, You don't believe you make the best decisions. You don't trust other people to make the best, even make good decisions either. Or you might overly rely on people for to make decisions for you. So again, that goes back to your question. I'm going to land this plane because I know you said I'm going a little long, but you have to learn to trust yourself. Again, you have to learn that everything is not a threat. And I would argue that many of us who are trying to get in relationships and be in relationships, we struggle because our earliest childhood relationships didn't feel safe to us. However, from an African-centered Njia framework, the way of understanding that is that your parents are not the enemy. Your parents were also a part of the greater society that set them up.
That's very important.
Yeah. Because if you don't see that contextually, what happens is you begin to feel like a victim from day one, and you have a lack of empathy. In fact, lots of people who respond to trauma believe that they're empaths, and I don't believe they are. I just think they're hyperly sensitive. They feel things, but many times they feel it through their own lenses. They call themselves empaths, but the problem is they struggle when they are hyper aroused. They ain't feeling no empathy for nobody besides themselves, because they feel like they're hopeless. They feel like they're defenseless. They feel overwhelmed. So in those moments, they ain't feeling for nobody. Right. And this is why it shows up in our relationships in very interesting ways, because they keep going back to that state when they felt unprotected as a child, or as a girlfriend or boyfriend, or what have you. But typically, you are less likely to even experience that in your relationships if your earliest childhood experiences, you feel secure, you feel safe, you feel protected.
That's deep, brother. That's deep. I'm curious to know. So you spoke about how we as African and New African people, we maybe spirituality or our way of looking at the world, our ethos, may almost be like a protective lens in some respect. It may give us the way we don't see ourselves as, we may have been victimized, but we may not see ourselves as victims, and so we move through the world differently. But I'm curious to know, does this protective lens, something that we use to survive or helps us survive, does it ever become a distortion? Can that ever become problematic in a way that may limit our growth or relationships?
Yeah, and that's why I think I tried to separate what I would call a pseudo sense of meaning making, which I would just technically call spiritual bypassing. And spiritual bypassing, I don't think it's always bad, but I believe as African people, Black people, I'm not going to believe, I'm going to argue, and I maintain that we overly use what people have identified as spirituality, because I don't even think that's spirituality personally. What most of us believe is spirituality, I believe it's delusion. I believe it's fantasy. I'm not saying there's no utility there, but if you truly see the world this way is one thing. If you truly believe that if you are convinced that you are protected, if you truly believe that you are not a victim, if you truly believe this thing, it's very difficult for you to be traumatized. But if you are a person, I'm talking about emotional, psychological trauma, but if you are a person who says it because everybody else is saying it, or you saying it because you learned it at your spiritual house, or you saying it because it helps you in that moment escape from reality, the hurt, the pain of all of the thing, and you're lying to yourself, you're more likely to set yourself up for trauma because you have tapped out. You have disassociated from reality. But somebody who truly has confidence in him or herself is very, very difficult for that person to become traumatized. Something catastrophic may happen and they might not be traumatized. But maybe it would, in order to even get to that level, it would require something seriously catastrophic to have this person be traumatized. But people who feel like they have the strength to get through it, I'm talking about in a sense that's still consistent with reality, they are very hard to shake.
Wow, that is very empowering. I like, that's letting us know that we have the power through our choices and the way we look at ourselves in the world to, in some respects, kind of circumnavigate some of this the wickedness, man, that's thrown our way, and that's empowering. Because if that weren't true, Dr. Ausar, we'd be in some really bad shape. That would mean we would just have no recourse. We would just be victimized.
Yeah, and I think that part of the issue that's going on that we find now is that a lot of us, getting back to conceptual frames and worldviews and all of that, is that many of us are adopting what King and Malcolm spoke against at some point, this liberal way of viewing the world. And I would argue that even my own liberal training in the liberal academic institutions, they typically, if you're not careful, they can have you analyzing yourself and looking at yourself as a victim. I think one of the most powerful pieces of work from our African-centered community that people typically overlook is the book Afrocentricity. Especially, there's a part in this book that Dr. Dang, my Bible, what was his name? Malefe Kitty Asante. Yeah, thank you. He speaks about, even in our own movements, lots of times we have this consciousness of oppression he speaks about. But he says that conscious of oppression is coming from a victimized mentality, and it has you even lose your own agency. But when you look at, he has another frame he calls it the consciousness of victory framing. And when you look at things from a victorious framework, again, you are less likely to be traumatized. In fact, when you see the victories in the things, you realize what you are capable of. That's why Dr. John Henry Clarke, in this book, let me see, this book here, he speaks about the idea of history, being essential to knowing where you are in the world. He said history tells a people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important, an understanding of history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. So in this particular book, I know you're familiar with it, this thin book here, Dr. Clarke is breaking down our ability to resist oppression and our successes even. And see, when you see the world from a victorious lens, not a superficial victorious lens, but not a pseudo victorious lens, but when you really know what you are capable of, you will be less likely to be traumatized. But getting back to the liberal idea I'm speaking to, what liberal training does, it teaches people that is this big old system that is hurting you. Let me just be clear. That is so big that you cannot win the fight. In fact, you have to depend on them in a sense. And what it becomes really good at is pointing at how you have been a victim, but not a victor. And I'm not saying that, see, for me, is a both and. I think we have to understand what we've been through, how we've been hurt from the society in our own family lineage, but also understand our resilience, because even part of the liberal training, and even I'm talking about, we evolved these liberal training. I'm talking about us black people is now, they're like, I'm tired of being resilient. So now that's become a popular term. I'm tired of being resilient. I'm tired of doing the work. We've done the work. No, I'm sorry. You, if you think that you did enough, I'm sorry. You don't. You are looking at this from a very apolitical framework, and that is what liberal training does to us. It gives us the thought that we have rights that we don't have to fight for. But nonetheless, we have to know the whole story. And I'll close on this. The reason why knowing the entire story is essential from a individual or a collective standpoint, group standpoint, is that one of the major features of trauma is fragmented memories. And those fragmented memories actually keep people in a state of being traumatized. And traumatization, being traumatized is very different than experiencing a trauma. To be traumatized, from my understanding framework, it is a physiological response that you live daily. Your cortisol levels and your and other let's say chemical levels are off balance. They're out of whack. You're seeing things and remembering things in a very fragmented sense. And what do you do when you don't see the whole story? You make up stuff. So in essence, another feature of trauma is that your belief system, as Dr. Joy DeGruy speaks about, is compromised. And hence, because we have these faulty beliefs, we make poor decisions. We will do things that are against our own well-being because of our fears. And that is what it is like to be in a traumatized state where you believe what you believe. So you respond, you feel and react to these things, whether what you believe is true or not. Again, you don't believe and you don't trust too many people on a individual level or a collective level. So when you don't trust too many people, including yourself, you are in a world and you feel like you have no map. And that's why I think it goes back to what Dr. John Henry Clark is speaking about, where we have to learn, we have to bring the story, we have to understand history, we have to understand our own history. We also have to understand our collective history and rewrite that narrative. In Western academia, they have something called narrative therapy. But I think our scholars been talking about it before they put those terms out there. So, or name and label these things. So again, I'm not one of those people that say, don't look and study and learn from these people, but don't believe these people. Just know it's limited.
That's right.
It's not the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Now I'm curious to know, what role do you think cultural storytelling? So in this respect, we're talking about music, social media, community dialogue, play in either, let's say, reinforcing or healing some of the negative narratives that we've or beliefs or delusions, as you put it, from our racial trauma, so to speak. What role does cultural storytelling play in this whole piece?
I think I would probably say it can be helpful, but because too many of us approach things haphazardly, without aim, without understanding everything that you do should have intent. And ultimately what I'm saying is because we approach things with an apolitical framework, way of seeing or conceptualizing things, even when we think we're doing something good, it ultimately serves, let me just stay with serves, the status quo. And even though it may feel good, it may be nostalgic, it may even feel like some level of relief and release. If we don't tie all these things back to some political or understanding how they serve us on a greater, from a greater political standpoint, then we might end up not serving us as much as we think we are. So some people tell me, like when they come and they talk to me, they say, well, I'll be like, that's not true, right? They be like, but why does it matter? Now, I have no problem with people believing stuff, because we all gonna believe things. But my thought is, if it's serving you, then we can stay there. But at the point when it's no longer serving you and us, then we got to talk about it. And even a apolitical approach to therapy is serving the status quo, because that is what is taught. And I'm gonna come back to your question. That is what's taught, that we be this blank slate. We just be non what is it called? We're co-journeyers, and all the things that work for white people really well. Because once you own the system and run the system, you don't have to do anything. You can be as neutral as you're saying you are. So taking that neutrality back to our arts movements, whatever we do, we have to consider the political consequences, the psychosocial political consequences, because there's so many people out here. I know artists that are very politically astute, and I know artists that believe they're politically astute because they're going off their feelings, but they don't do no studying. Or they don't study under anybody, because see what this system has done from my standpoint and optic, and I think my collective of elders, is that it has glamorized, and I know this is not your question specifically, but
hey, brother, that's all right.
It has glamorized people in the arts. It has given, I don't care what level you're at. In fact, I know you did you dropped a hot poem, right? I heard it some time that it was fire, right? But what it has done is given certain skill sets in our community more, I don't know, if you can drop
more like validity or credibility.
Or we are attracted to people because they can do poetry. We are attracted to people because they can sing. We are attracted to people because they can do these things, but we don't give the same. But these people, because they have big social media profiles, because of their talent, their gifts, but we struggle when we have people who have a craft called being a craft in philosophy, a craft in thinking, a craft in political science, a craft in all these things, a craft in African, but it's because now I've done and I've risen in business, and I've risen in the arts, and I've risen in all these other directions. And my platforms are big. Somehow I believe that I know more. I believe that I'm more successful than you because I have some level of celebrity. But the arts, drama reenactment, all these things can be very powerful to expressing oneself. Drawing, I don't care if sandboxing, I'm big on meditation, I'm big on all it. I think everything is an art. And I think I said this with you before. So I'm not like, even me sitting here and me talking, and maybe somebody might think I sound intellectual or philosophical or what have you. I feel like this is, and I might bring a source, but I still, to me, is artistic. You know what I mean? So from an African-centered standpoint, I think we understand the connection between that which is logical and that which is art. And there's no real hardcore separation, but because we've been taught, and I'm going to argue, and I argue this because I think that as Black people, we have been taught to overly depend on art. We have and not the logic, because Europeans have punished us with logic. So we've swung the pendulum to the other side. We've been from my standpoint, we have given so much to the ethereal that we don't really care about the material. And what happens is you do want the material, but in your mind, in escaping from reality, you deal with the ethereal because that is what you have greater access to at this moment. And sometimes not believing that you can have a claim to that which is material. And I'll say this, and I'll let that plane land. From my studies, from a spiritual standpoint, from an African-centered standpoint, and I will claim Njia psychotherapy, Njia model, is that the ethereal is manifested through the material. So from an African-centered standpoint, the spirit only manifests itself and can only manifest itself through the material. They say that, and I've read somewhere many years ago, that there's not one is more important than the other. To think that the spirit is more essential than the material is to have that without any vessel to operate through.
Got you. Now, let me ask you this. Once again, though, those of you watching, this is every second Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't miss it. And don't keep all this to yourself. Don't be a stingy African, new African. Share this link. Let people know that you came on. You heard the brother kicking some very good stuff that made you think of things differently. That's very important. I'm curious to know, in your view, what's the difference between understanding trauma and possibly using trauma as an excuse not to activate, not to get involved, not to have agency over ourselves individually or in our community? Because it seems to me that could be a danger. How do you see that?
I'm curious to how you see it.
Yeah, listen, brother, I'm a humble dude. When something's above my pay grade,
I mean, because you kind of stated it in the question. I'm just
because I came with my mother and father. Like probably your typical Black parents. They would always say, my father was big on the history. This is what they did. This is how they did it. This is how it affects us. And I think his statement would be, others are responsible for our oppression, but only we are responsible for our liberation. That's how he would frame it. And that was his way of saying, regardless of what they've done, do not use they miseducated me as a way of saying to get in your way of seeking education. Don't let what other people have done get us in a paralyzed, stuck situation. You use that, I think you used that term, stuck, earlier. So I'm wondering, when you're meeting with people in the community, because I know you do individual counseling and stuff like that. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So when somebody, So when somebody comes and say, yeah, man, this guy I'm with, or the people in the building or whatever, it's always an external thing or person, right? Do you ever find it difficult trying to say, I know those external things in your life are real, and they exert some type of energy that's negative toward you, but I need you to understand what can you do? Like, in other words, they're not leaving just having complained for 2 hours about the things going on, but you give them a sense of, yeah, that's valid, but let's get to what you can do. You may not be able to control all those people, right? But what agency do you have? Do you ever find a struggle with that?
I mean, that is the struggle.
Mm.
And I think that on both sides is not understood, because there's people who are often able to move on and move past their circumstances in a way. And sometimes they don't think that they're traumatized.
Mm.
And then there's people who get caught in their emotions and think that those other people are just cold. And they think that sometimes they'll probably express that they've been through trauma. Now, I think that trauma is a very complex experience. Trauma is a very complex impact on one's psychosocial physical reality. And as much as I would like to speak to them in that manner and have and do in ways that it is a process that one has to go through because it's real. And I would argue that most of us, in some ways, have experienced, if not all of us, have experienced it and have some level of, I would start with the level of stress to trauma to have experienced crisis. So I think that many of us, to varying degrees, have these small traumas or major traumas. Now, traumatized, again, is a state, something different. But those traumas that keep you from wanting to do things, many times we don't even know, and we're not even conscious of them. Those uncomfortable feelings when we go into rooms. But again, some of us are so cut off from our emotions that, I mean, I'm not saying that resilient people are all traumatized. I'm not going to say that, because I'm not even saying resilient. Some people have become cold and they have been very successful and have not realized that they are too traumatized. So what do I mean by that? That they don't even, they will say, let's move on. You know? And I understand that as a person who knows how to move on. But sometimes that approach, you have to have a lot of empathy to be able to understand the impact that different people experience as it relates to trauma. Because lots of times we're responding in ways that is consistent with our way of understanding, our way of being, and how we deal with things. So to answer the question, I do challenge people to see how they're stuck. People, when we've been, and when we experience a level of trauma up to traumatization, our mind doesn't think that we are stuck all the time. We will find ways to make our circumstances the result of other people. What I call it is a perpetual victim, a pedestalized victim in this country, in this society. Not now with Trump, But when we're talking about counseling culture and self-help culture, I would argue that the way and approach we're going by doesn't necessarily render enough accountability to get yourself from being unstuck. But but I am not saying that it still shouldn't be a process, because even with my students, I'm a professor too. I teach PhD counseling students. And even with my students, we argue a lot of times about, no, not a lot of times, but recently we had an argument about them feeling uncomfortable. And they felt uncomfortable because I'm teaching a course on social justice. And we're talking about disagreement. In counseling culture, lots of times, they have these places that never really sat with me. They're called safe spaces. And personally, that word has never quite sat with me. So to tie that back to your question, I think we've created this terminology called safe space, which is needed, but only for a certain period of time. But we've created these perpetual safe spaces where people are to come in and feel safe enough to express themselves and not have any real accountability or pushback. And this is what people began to believe therapy is. And hence, if it doesn't feel good to them, it's not therapy. But in my own training, in my own model, in my own life story, I understand a safe space is good for building relationship and rapport, perhaps, but maybe not, because some people don't respond well to these places where you just friendly to them. But these safe places are places that breed false safety and hence stunts responsibility and growth. But I do think it's a process.
Now, Dr. Ausar, man, you've been, it's one measure of how well I would imagine a broadcast is going, is that the time goes by so quick. We're already at the time we're supposed to be stopping, which to me is good. Leave people wanting more, encourage people to get here on time. This is a good thing. I want to leave with one question. It's kind of going back. You said something that I believe in very strongly. You said something to the effect of, to identify when something is no longer serving you. Something's not serving you. You're believing in something. I don't know. Stevie Wonder comes to mind. You believe in things you don't understand, you suffer, right? So you have this thought and whatever belief, but it's not serving you. Is there an objective way that we can teach our people to be able to determine when whatever we believe or think is not serving? Is there an objective way to measure that so that people can say, I get what Dr. Ausar is saying. I've done whatever, this isn't serving me. I need to find another way to process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can teach it, but it also depends on the topic and the person and where that person is and how much that those fantasies and fallacies and delusions really keep that person together, or how dependent that person is on that reality. Did I say dependent on that reality? I feel like I missed the word. You about to say something?
No, I was saying, yeah, you did say what you
Okay, dependent on that reality. But so here at TNAT, we do things like I have a rite of passage. I think people should go through a rite of passage. I think that part of the issue we have in our community is that, especially this is a result of trauma, is that we don't trust enough to even take us through a real rite of passage. And then some of us create rites of passage that doesn't really demand inner transformation. Not enough rite of passage are challenging people on psychosocial, spiritual levels. Lots of times they just stay at the physical and surface. And they also serve as safe places or very symbolic, ritualistic, which rituals are necessary because the whole rite of passage is a ritual, but it doesn't really get to the depth of the ritual. And lots of times as people who are taking initiates through, we don't want no smoke. We don't want no sweat. So we let people just go through things. But in order to transform ourselves, we have to learn to give people resistance and deal with resistance. I forgot your question now.
I, I I think you addressed it. Listen, I want to say this in closing, Dr. Winkler. Thanks again for your time. I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion. As you rightly said, this is a process. So to give this one episode, a one-off episode, wouldn't do this subject justice. So it's good, I think, that we're doing it monthly. But if viewers, either live or in the later recorded version, leave this conversation remembering one pivotal thing about trauma and the conceptual lenses through which we interpret the world, what an insight or practice would you encourage them to begin applying uh, in their own lives starting today?
I think that goes back to your previous question. I think that being in communication with my dear brother Bobby Imhotep over the last few months, he actually came to my class, and I appreciate him saying that we should learn and we should continue to interrogate our thoughts, what we believe, what we think we believe. We should ask ourselves, why do I believe that? And how is it serving me? I think that we should ask ourselves the tough questions, and we should get with someone, a jegna, a teacher, a therapist, whatever. But I think we should also connect ourselves with community, and community that can hold us accountable, and we can hold ourselves accountable to being accountable to community.
Well said. We're going to leave that right there. Brother Dr. Ausar Winkler, family coming out of Bmore, Baltimore, making Baltimore proud. A lot of activity going on in Baltimore. I'm hearing and seeing on social media, and that's a beautiful thing. I want to thank you for your time, good brother. We're going to come back every time we meet. Those you watching, there'll be a different sort of topic that we're dealing with. We're going to deal with parenting, relationships, community organizing. We're going to try to cover the whole gamut so that we understand that what we dealt with and are still dealing with and processing leaks and spills into everything we touch. Right? I don't get traumatized and that trauma doesn't leak into my relationship, my organizing, my job. There's spillage. So this is very important. I want to thank you for making yourself available for us, good brother. And thank you for what I believe is a very stimulating conversation. I'm learning a lot as I'm listening to you. Are there any last words you want to leave with us before we end this particular episode?
No, I appreciate you, and I appreciate those who tuned in. I see Sister Brenda Hilaire, I believe.
Queen. Yeah, that's the queen.
That's your queen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, I saw the picture y'all out the other day. Yes,
yeah, man.
Y'all was looking good.
Having a little fun, man. Having a little fun with the queen.
Sister Silva from, I think she's in Germany. Thanks for tuning in.
Sheila.
Yeah, and Africa, I saw you live earlier. And everybody, I appreciate y'all tuning in and being in conversation with us. But I also want to say I give you mad respect, and and I appreciate you with your stimulating questions, and anybody and everybody who can listen to me, because I know I'm probably going to say things a different way than typical, or something that just yeah, I appreciate it.
Hey, man, it was all good, brother. Thank you again. Family, to you, we say peace and black power. We will win if we believe in ourselves, study, and organize. And some say we are winning and just may not recognize it. Thank you, Dr. Dennis Ausar Winkler. Peace and black power, family with Kusu. Have a blessed day, all right?
Peace.